The question in Florida tonight is what to do with Tillicum after killing a young trainer at Sealand of the Pacific in Oak Bay in 1991. The pod of killer whales that ravaged Keltie Byrne. Keltie Byrne was a strong, competitive swimmer, but none of her training could match the brute force of three killer whales. They toyed with her and mauled her until she drowned. The terrifying trio was led by the notorious Tillicum. Poor Keltie was bruised, battered, and beaten as these three killer orcas viciously dragged her underwater over and over again. Keltie was heard screaming and pleading for her life until her final breath. This is the story of Keltie Byrne, the first victim of Tillicum, history's most notorious killer whale in captivity. Keltie Byrne was just an animal lover. Keltie Lee Byrne was a good-natured girl who loved wildlife, especially marine animals. The 20-year-old biology student from the University of Victoria had decided to join the now-defunct Sealand in British Columbia. Keltie wanted to experience working with whales while also earning some extra money to begin life as a young woman. Keltie was desperate to get up close with Orcas, whom she regarded as the most impressive beasts on the planet, and working for Sealand was her dream job. In the 90s, Sealand of the Pacific attracted huge crowds because of the orcas. Sealand opened in 1969 and kept several captive orcas, including their first, a female called Haida. None of the orcas took to captivity, and soon most died until Sealand finally got the terrible trio, a male named Tillicum and two females, Nuka IV and Haida U. The orcas had been captured from eastern Iceland, and though they were housed together, the other two females bullied Tillicum night after night. On several occasions, he was found battered, bruised, and bleeding. What made matters worse was how the three whales were kept in metal pods just 26 feet across and 20 feet deep. Tillicum was a massive 22-foot orca, so if he stood vertically in the pod, he would stick out of the water, and yet, this was their home for 14 hours a day. Besides the bruises from the fights, all three orcas would often be found with scratches and cuts from rubbing their sides against the metal pods. But that was just part of their misery. The three orcas were made to perform 7 days a week, 8 hours a day, and slowly, the pressure and trauma took their toll. Tillicum was never a normal whale. Even though he hated captivity, he was strangely still a playful beast, youthful and eager to learn. Most of the trainers at Sealand loved working with him instead of the other two because he was so young. Tillicum often struggled with commands, and because of this, food was denied to all three. Perhaps this is why the whales hated Tillicum and abused him, as well as showing additional signs of discontent. Nootka had already bitten one of the trainers, including a blind woman in the audience who was asked to pet her. To protect Tillicum from Nootka and Haida, Sealand kept him in a separate pod, but being smaller, it only made matters worse. The first warnings that Tillicum was slowly turning psychotic came from biologist Eric Walters. Walters fired off scathing letters to the Canadian Federation of Humane Societies, highlighting the safety concerns he had about the aquarium. The issue was really that we store these whales at night in what we call a module, and the lights were all turned out, so there's really no stimulation. They're just in this dark metal 20-foot by 30-foot pool, Walters remarked. He stated that Sealand was not providing the orcas with any type of new stimulation and knew that eventually these killer whales would crack. His chilling warnings gradually began taking shape as Tillicum displayed possessive behavior, grabbing anything that fell into the pod and refusing to give it up. On February 20, 1991, the three whales seized their chance when they found Keltie Byrne had fallen into the pool. For them, it was like, oh look, the human wants to play. They were certainly not going to miss the opportunity, especially Tillicum, who went wild. Keltie Byrne was enjoying her job at Sealand. She had proven to be a diligent worker. She loved the orcas but was still not allowed to swim or interact with them. It was the afternoon and a few shows had just finished. Keltie's job was clearing the pool when disaster struck. The audience had not left yet, and several hundred people were still in their seats, watching as Keltie suddenly slipped and fell halfway into the pool. Falling into the pool was no big deal, and halfway in is also halfway out. All she needed was to pull herself up. As Keltie gripped the side to try pulling herself up, she felt something forcefully tugging at her body. It was Tilikum, who caught Keltie by her foot and pulled her back in. Keltie became the stimulation the whales needed, but for the trainers and other eyewitnesses, it was a dangerous development. Keltie had to be brought out immediately, or it could turn fatal. With Keltie in his mouth, Tilikum raced around the pool, dragging her underwater and surfacing again. Head trainer Steve Huckster, who witnessed the incident, remarked later that they never had anything in the pool that was so interactive. They just got incredibly excited and stimulated. Yes, indeed, Keltie was nothing but a live toy, and the more she thrashed around and tried to save herself, the more it excited the whales, who all joined in the fun. "Help me, I don't want to die." It was a nightmare. All her dreams were being dashed right before her eyes as she knew. Somehow, this could be the end. The three whales took turns grabbing her. Each time she broke free, they did not allow her to get to the side of the pool. Tilikum was the most violent, yet in terms of whale speak, this was just horsing around and nothing more. After all, this would be the standard way of playing with prey in a pod of whales, especially large seals. And there was Keltie, a struggling human. Trainer Karen McGee, standing on the side of the pool with other trainers, watched in horror as Tilikum battered Keltie. As he rose above the water's surface with her, she saw Keltie wave frantically, screaming her name and saying, "Help me, I don't want to die." At this point, Karen threw a life ring out to Keltie, who tried grabbing it, but Tilikum would not let her. Several trainers began clanging buckets and throwing fish into the water to distract the whales, but nothing worked. Tilikum was having the time of his life. All the bullying, the pent-up frustration, and the trauma were now erupting in a moment of frenzied and violent playfulness. A large net was thrown in to try and separate Keltie from the whales. Still, it possibly backfired, causing the whales to remain underwater longer, a deadly development for Keltie's survival. Eyewitnesses began leaning over the side of the pool and saw how the three whales bounced Keltie around underwater. She was being rammed against the sides, a sure sign that her bones were fractured. The poor woman was being killed slowly and painfully. When Tilikum rolled one final time with Keltie, she was still conscious. She screamed one last time for help and then disappeared underwater again. This time, she couldn't hold out any longer. In the next few moments, Keltie died. The coroner termed it forceful drowning. Eventually, after 2 hours of being bored with a dead plaything, Tilikum let Keltie go. When Keltie's body was recovered from the pool with the help of a net, she looked terrible. Her injuries were horrendous. Keltie suffered several fractures, punctured organs, and lacerations across her body. It was truly a sad day, and ironically, one could not blame the animals for their actions. Speaking to reporters, Sealand manager Alejandro Bolt reported she had 10 tooth marks on her body, the largest on her left eye, but otherwise she was untouched. The whales had stripped her clothes off. It was just a tragic accident. In stark contrast, eyewitness reports stated Sealand downplayed the incident and released an official report. The incident shocked many and enraged animal activists worldwide, commenting on how deplorable conditions and the mismanagement of such large beasts in captivity were responsible for their gruesome behavior. Keltie's death, however, triggered a movement that finally led to the closure of Sealand in the Pacific. Yet it did not lead to the freeing of the whales. SeaWorld of Orlando seized the opportunity and purchased Tilikum. To protect the whale, the water park in Orlando gave Tilikum another platform to kill again, and he repeated the feat 2 more times. Although Tilikum died years later from disease, he would go down as the most famous orca whale in marine park history and the only whale to have caused the deaths of multiple people: Keltie Byrne, Daniel Dukes, and another trainer, Don Brancho. The murder of Brancho was far more disturbing than what had happened to Keltie. It made sensational news and finally led to governments cracking down on keeping orcas in captivity. Today, the debate rages on whether marine parks like SeaWorld should be allowed to use orcas as performing animals. Like Sealand in the Pacific, SeaWorld has always chosen to keep a tight lid on controversies. Even the incident concerning Dawn Brancheau was attributed only to drowning. Should children today be educated on why such entertainment is wrong for both humans and animals? Perhaps with awareness, more and more people will stop witnessing such shows. But until that time comes, places like SeaWorld will continue using orcas despite the controversy. Keltie Byrne was simply the first of Tillicum's victims. So let's take a look at some of his others, shown on the screen.